Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Adventuring Academy, the podcast where we talk about all things tabletop and how to run awesome games for you and your friends. My name is Brendan Lee Mulligan. I'm your humble dungeon master. With me today, our guest. Oh my goodness, am I so excited to have this person on the show today to talk. You know her and love her as the creator and host of Geek and Sundry's Relics and Rarities, and also might know her as Twiggy from Critical Role. She played Jessica Hamby on True Blood and Karen Page on Daredevil. She just filmed a new crime thriller, Ida Ray, which should be coming out sometime in the future, just filmed mid-pandemic, and is an advocate for Foundation Fighting Blindness. Oh my goodness, we are so excited to have her here. Please give a warm welcome to Deborah Ann Wool!
Oh my God, the energy level. I don't know if I can match it. It's very impressive.
I miss live comedy. I miss the performance. I miss the stage. Deborah, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Excited. No, I'm good. After we did that DM Pro Tips panel together for the D&D celebration a few weeks ago, and it was just so nice getting to know you and talking to you, and you were one of the panelists that I knew the least, so when you reached out, I was like, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity to get to know him better.
I'm so excited. It was wonderful. Everything you said on that panel, I was like, yes, this is exactly lovely getting to meet you there as well. That was such a fun get together.
I like when panels feel like you could just hang out the rest of the day and talk another few hours because you're just talking about something you love.
I know it really. I was very funny because I feel like I was so flabbergasted during that panel because I was much more interested. Like what everyone was saying. I was like, wait, don't move on. What explore that thought more. Like that's so cool. That's such a
You also had a show right after it, right? So you were in another world, being like, "Oh my God, I have to DM in 45 minutes."
Yeah, I think you're like clocking into the reason my energy level stays here is because if it dips at all, it's full blown crash and sleep for 2 weeks. We gotta keep that ball in the air.
All right.
Yes, that was such a true joy, and I want to talk a little bit about first of all, people should go check that out. That was a great sort of behind the screen panel from D&D Celebration. It's still available online. A ton of awesome DMs there. Kelly Lindangelo, who's running NDND, which is a new all-native D&D podcast. We had Satine Phoenix and B. Dave Walters and Travis McElroy. Brilliant, wonderful geniuses. So to kind of like introduce our audience to your story and biography with this game, what was your initiation into tabletop? How did you discover the game and get started playing in these worlds of myth and fantasy?
Right. So I'm a newbie in the sort of grand scheme of most Dungeons and Dragons players, in that I probably started 7 to 10 years ago, something like that. So as an adult, I started playing as an adult. I was always very interested in it when I was younger. But, the crazy thing about D&D and the great thing about D&D is you have to have friends to play it with. It's a social game at some level. And I was very, very unpopular when I was younger. So I had no one to like teach me how to play. I couldn't really form my own group and learn. So, I think also back in the 90s when I was a kid, there were maybe more barriers. It was a little bit more of a niche club. So when I was older, I kept kind of pushing for it and talking about it. A friend got me like a starter kit. And then one of my managers at the time, he is an old school D&D player, has been playing his whole life, 35 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so he offered to run a game for me and some of my friends who were interested. And we were instantly hooked. And we were coming in at 4E, so that's like nobody's favorite edition, but it has such a soft spot in my heart because it's the one I learned on, and there are many aspects of 4E that I really love and like pull over into 5E sometimes. So yes, I started playing there, and after we completed sort of our first newbie campaign, I wanted to play more and more, so I started learning how to run games. I ran Fendelver's Mine. I did that, the starter kit edition for some friends. And then we decided to do like a red robin where one person in the group would DM for a turn, and then we'd switch it around, per like one shot. So like every couple of get-togethers, we'd shift it. And that was really my first experience writing my own adventure. And that was really addicting because it's so fun to like make a puzzle or a problem and then watch all your friends solve it and have them do it way better than you ever anticipated. Since then, I just can't get enough.
I love that so much. And I want to talk to you about that moment that you're describing of like that first time where you've been running published content, running published adventures, and then you dip that toe into home brewing. Right. And I think that there are a lot of people who watch the show who I think get very intimidated by that, even if they're not intimidated by kind of the referee role of like adjudicating an adventure. Sure. That kind of creative background. And I also, your style as a dungeon master is so incredible, so fun and engaging and evocative, of course. And specifically, I love that you brought up puzzles because I feel like that is such a exciting part about your style in particular, and also something that I think has fractal images of itself throughout Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop, because both from the literal, like you're in an ancient tomb and there's some kind of hieroglyphic puzzle on the wall, to the kind of puzzles you make about complex social dynamics can almost be thought of as a puzzle, right?
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about that experience of getting hooked and making your own stuff, and like kind of what your key was in terms of where your creativity wanted to go in your initial forays into world building and running your own content.
Sure. So I'm a little different than I think a lot of other D&D players I've met who kind of grew up in it, in that what scares me is the published material. The amount of history and lore that comes behind that. Like if you ask me about religious sects in the Sword Coast or different, deities, I cannot answer you. I know nothing about Tiamat. I'm not interested in like delving into that sort of history. So for me, playing an adventure or running an adventure in someone else's world is so intimidating because there's just so much I don't know. Whereas if I write my own world, I can do as much backstory as I want. I can create deities or do whatever I want, or I'm totally open and free to improvise. And if someone says, you come across a temple, in the moment, I can make up some iconography or something like that. And then together at the table, we're creating something. And it doesn't have to feel like I memorized a history book in order to play Dungeons and Dragons. So for me, that was a barrier to entry that as soon as I started writing my own material, got broken down.
I cannot tell you how reaffirming what you just said is. I have done so many episodes of this podcast, and you are the first dungeon master I've talked to that has said, like, word for word, the thing that lives in my heart of like everything you're saying is an asset is terrifying to me. Like,
scary, right?
It's so scary. Especially also, and something that we will get into because we've had some submitted questions about this in terms of you, like one of the things that people love to talk about on the podcast is about how their multidisciplinary selves bring other skill sets to this. Obviously, you have a tremendous skill set in terms of acting and performance. For myself, I came up through UCB, improvisation and comedy. And one of the things that I said to people originally that I think directly applies to D&D and what you're talking about with that idea of lore is I had a friend one time, because I did improv for many years, loved doing improv, and someone was like, why don't you do more stand-up, right? And I was like, oh, stand-up's terrifying. And they were like, what? Like, what's the matter? You go on stage with nothing and stand-up's terrifying? And my response was, if I go up there with an act, if I know that I have a 5-minute bit about, like, let me tell you the thing about this airplane food, if I start my 5-minute airplane bit and no one laughs, I'm trapped. When I go out there with nothing, it's almost like if we were gearing up for battle and someone was putting on full plate mail and I was like taking my armor off of like, I don't want to be.
I'm going to impress you with my improvisation knowledge. But that's TJ Jagodowski's thing, right? So
yes.
Had the opportunity to audition for SNL, all that different stuff, but he's an improv guy. And in my conversations with him and the documentary that they made, he talks a lot about exactly that if he's on stage and he knows he has to stay until the end of the scene, that is panic inducing for him.
Yes.
Whereas going, hey, at any moment I could make up a reason to walk off, great. So it's fascinating how different brains and different comfort zones relate to things differently. So you're a TJ, or he's a Brennan.
I honestly, being compared to TJ Jagodowski, TJ and Dave are so.
Right?
Oh my God,
it's incredible.
I saw them at Barrow Street in New York Live,
yeah.
and I mean, like flabbergasted, a level of just, and at that point I was teaching improv. So you would think that I had a certain level of like cynicism about it. Sure. And I just watched it jaw on the floor, like magic.
They're just incredible.
So good. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's a definite analogy about connecting. Because the nice thing about improv is it feels in a weird way collaborative with the audience, because you can adjust. And one of the pieces of advice I used to give students all the time was you have a free barometer for what the game of your scene is going to be. Like when that laughter pops out of the audience, you know that whatever you just did or said is successful. And so that ability to, and I feel like the same exact thing is true if I'm improvising at the table. If I have this wealth of pre-built material that's like this huge heavy weight on my back, and something in the moment gets responded to by my players, it's like I don't want any of that weighing me down to go, oh, you like this?
Yeah.
Now I just can flesh that out in the moment. And it's like you're saying, there's much more collaboration because your creativity is being spent flourishing on and embellishing what you already know is successful.
Well, I like the idea that the players then get some ownership over the world. Like one of my favorite things was in our 5th episode of Relics, we had Kevin Smith on. Now, he's one of my favorite people to have ever played Dungeons & Dragons with, because he did not know how to play Dungeons & Dragons before the filming. He still, to this day, does not really know how to play Dungeons & Dragons. But it does not matter. He was so wonderful and free and in the moment. And I think all he did was use his very base level sorcerer moves. Never got into like the higher stuff. It didn't matter. And he was playing a tiefling private detective. So in my little town of Bellbrook, he made up that there was a tiefling detective agency in town and that he had an office. And I was like, great. You go to his office. Like, why not? So now, within the context of that world, Kevin Smith created that, and that lives in the canon of that story. And I like that he and all of my other players that contributed different things along the way, that they get to leave their stamp, their footprint on the world. It isn't just me kind of controlling it. It gets to be a little bit of everything.
I think that is so true. And I think you're right that PCs do, your players can tell when things are born of like honest collaboration and are also born of like honest joy. You have those moments, and I think PCs can honestly help embellish things both by actively creating them and also by centering their focus on them. Like PCs have a tremendous power to storytell, even if they are leaving the decision making up to the dungeon master by virtue of what they pay attention to.
Yes, absolutely.
They are absolutely directing the focus of the dungeon master, right? And I think some PCs, at least a lot of my PCs, I think know they have that power and will sometimes abuse is not the right word. But gleefully make use of, take advantage of that ability to be like, I know if I ask questions about this funny old bartender NPC, I know Brennan's not gonna make up nothing.
Right.
So there is that playful thing of funneling a dungeon master's creativity, which I think is great. I think that level of
well, it's one of those things where, like, I always tell players, especially on like a taped show, where like someone made props, so we want to go there to like see the prop. So I always say something like, hey, be as creative as you want, explore everything that you want, just stay on quest. So I don't mind if you want to talk to that NPC for half an hour or whatever it is, but somewhere within your character, cultivate a compassion for, helping other people out, or a passion for collecting money or whatever it is. And I try in every one of my 5-room dungeons or whatever to give an emotional hook, a money hook, and a like plot hook. So the idea that no matter what your character is motivated by, there will be a reason for you to go in that dungeon and conquer these tests.
I love those 3. That's awesome. So like money, plot. I love the delineation between plot and character.
Yeah.
What is your like separation between those 2 ideas?
Very little. We actually got into this conversation on the DM panel because I do think a lot of D&D players love the backstory and they love the lore. The thing that's sort of scary to me is what really excites a lot of people about this. And so they create very deep, complex backstories for their characters that they want to play through. And that's fantastic. It's so opposite to how I get drawn into story. And again, either because I'm an actor or not, or I don't know, I always feel like we learn more about characters when we see them in action in present day, that we rewrite our own histories all the time. If I told you everything about my past, it would be true on an emotional level, but on a literal level, it would probably be very wrong because we rewrite in our brains. And actually, if I were put in a situation where I had to make a choice today, that's going to say more about who I am than any story I could tell you about my past. So I like to really bring those 2 together and say, again, I told the story on the panel, but so Xander Genre's character, Ricky, he had written very specifically with like this lust for gold. Mm-hmm. And so I put him in a situation where there was gold everywhere. And if he touched it, he was going to kill his friends, And in that moment, not only did he choose not to touch the gold, but he chose to take a mummy rot punch for his friend and suffer the consequences of that. And to me, you need both. You needed to know that he wanted money to also then, appreciate what he sacrificed. But again, that moment to me says so much more about who Ricky the Huckster is than anything he could tell you about, no, I just care about money. I don't care about people, So I like to really ask the characters to confront things in the present tense in the stories that we're telling. That the story of this campaign is the story of your quest and what you do now. It's not the story of where you came from.
I love that so much. Not only is that great, like DMing and PCing advice, that's just great writing advice in general. For
possibly, yeah.
I definitely think so, because I think that there's this idea of like past is prologue, or the idea of like, that idea of like, oh well, that like everything you need to know about me, you can know from these things in my past. But right. I think that that's often a little bit of a crutch. And also there's an element too of, how do I put this? Like, very few people IRL have motivations that are as, I think I said this on the panel as well, but that thing of like I've never met anyone in LA where I was like, hey, like, so what brought you to LA? And they're like, the person who killed my father lives here and I'm hunting them down. You're like, whoa, that's specific. Like, people mostly, like, it would be very fun. Like, if adventurers were real, I feel like you would meet a lot of adventurers who were like, yeah, well, I was a soldier briefly, and then the war ended, and I was living in the big port city, and I was sort of working part-time as like a stevedore on the docks, but then another member of this mercenary guild moved over and he actually told me that there was going to be a spot opening up, and I said, well, I'll give it a,
I'm good at that stuff. I got to do something.
I gotta do something, right?
Yeah.
Like, what motivates people in their day-to-day life? Not to say that these epic backstories aren't great, but like you're saying, there is like, I feel like I have a lot of love in my heart for characters who are like, forget my backstory. I showed up to go on an adventure.
Yeah.
I'm an unlikely hero, and then here's the things that are showing you who I am.
Right.
In the moment.
Well, there's a piece of me too, and this is really an actor thing, is that in my opinion, if you're playing a character, that character is never bigger than you. You and your human personality and who you are. That's why we do Romeo and Juliet over and over and over again, because each new person who embodies those parts expands them and says something more. So I want players to bring as much of themselves, who they are today, to the part as the backstory that they've created for the character. So, you are likely not an evil person or a greedy person or those things. And if you want to explore those aspects of yourself in a character, that's fantastic. But put those two in tension. Let your personal, interests and beliefs be a part of it. That's really fun, I think, rather than trying to be like, I want to be the opposite of me or I want to be exactly the same as me. Can you kind of interweave the two?
Well, that's the thing too, is it's I think there's a very great point here, because a lot of times we see this sort of old conversation or argument within Dungeons and Dragons about like the sort of classic line of like, but it's not what my character would do, or like it is what my character would do. And the truth I'll say to give credence to that is, it is a bummer when you have to act outside of how you feel your character would behave for the purpose of not like overly rocking the boat. But what I would say is that that sort of cognitive dissonance can be avoided by, I think, making healthy story choices during character creation.
Yeah.
Like making that choice of like, we just talked about this. We had Marisha Ray just play this awesome character, Sonny Biscotto, on our side quest, Parts of Leviathan, who was an Aarakocra paladin who worshipped the pirate goddess of adventure and the horizon.
I love it.
Oh, it was incredible. An incredible character. 18-year-old parrot person wearing braces, worshipping a pirate god. We love it. But what's so great about her character is she just made this character of like, my character worships the goddess of adventure and believes in adventures as like almost a religious tenet. And I was like, that's so goddamn helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just making that choice to be like, no, I'm going to I will create this reason. I feel like there's a million things I want like rabbit holes I want to go down right now. But in terms of like writing and character development, well, let me ask you a question. How involved with your players are you during the character creation process? Are you like how hand in hand are you going with them during that part of the game?
Depends on the player. So if they've been playing forever, I say go at it. If they are newer to the game, I will create it from scratch and hand it to them and just walk them through it. If they're intermediate and just want some help, I'll walk through it with them. And usually it's like stages and steps. So the first time I make a character for someone, I'll just do it and then sit with them and let them play with it and explore it. And then the second time we'll sit together and they'll roll the dice and they'll make some choices about what they want. And then the third time, it just kind of level up your creation a bit. The only thing sometimes I will say to more experienced players when I say, hey, go create whatever you want. But if you create a character whose ancestry is sort of off the main manual, then you'll be in charge of how that works. Like, again, same thing with the deities. I'm like, I'm not going to learn all the deities. If you want to, worship one as a major part of your character, that's beautiful. Let me know and I'll mark it, and maybe you'll encounter a temple or something like that. Again, you are in charge of how much you want that to play a part in your story. Again, because I kind of want you to be present and making choices now. And also, generally, I like my worlds are pretty mustache twirly. They're pretty, everybody is going to be accepting of you no matter who you are, or, and so I'm not generally inclined to kind of play on some of those darker issues in my games. This is play space for me, fun space for me. And so I tend to try to keep it more about adventure and challenges and tests that are sort of fun and engaging in that way. So yeah, so again, if people want to play that way in my games, I'm totally open to it, but they will have to kind of take charge and how they want that to play into their story.
I think that makes perfect sense, and I think most players relish the opportunity to have authority over that kind of world building that is so personal to their character. I also, you said something that made me want to circle all the way back around to a topic that we left earlier, which we're talking about challenges and tests and puzzles specifically. So when you first started DMing, and especially like not only when you started maybe in like home games, but going into like relics and rarities,
right?
What is it about designing specifically tests and challenges and puzzles that you like, that you are drawn to, and what do you think like you have learned in doing that so successfully that you would say like, here are guidelines that have worked for me as I attempt to set this up to engage my players?
So, all right. So part one of that is why I like it, and part two of that is what you can do to do it more successfully at home. Okay. So part one, I've always been a puzzle person. I was a math and science geek in school. I love problem solving in general. It's the same. We were talking about putting together IKEA furniture, things like there's an element of that sort of, this is a giant mess of components, and I'm going to follow step-by-step logic instructions to create something that's finished and beautiful and has function. So, for me, an algebraic equation, which is a whole mess of numbers and letters, the idea that I can apply rules to that and slowly break it down to like X equals this is so exciting and calming and fun for me. So I think that's what draws me to puzzles. Most puzzles are about, here's what an impossible situation. How are you gonna make it possible? And sometimes I'll set up tasks that I don't have a solution for, or not a specific solution for, because frankly, I just want to hear what you have to say, and if it's cool, great. We'll roll some dice, and maybe you'll fail at it. But like I don't want to limit the solution to some of these challenges. So that would be a tip at home.
Oh man, another slam dunk piece of advice for Deborah Ann Wool. Yes, I love the problem where I don't know the solution yet. I love that so much.
So that's at one, and then there are the painstaking puzzles that I spend hours on. That there's a very specific path that you have to turn the dial to make it all work. And for me, that's just because it's a fun intellectual challenge for myself, and then a fun intellectual challenge for players. And I will say this, a piece of advice that I will give for people making puzzles like that at home, or riddles or anything like that, where it's going to take the sort of literal brain power of your party rather than their character brain power. I always offer an intelligence check or an investigation check for a hint. The idea being that, look, I'm not here to make you feel stupid or like you can't solve anything. It's never fun to spend 3 hours, not even knowing how to do the puzzle because it's too hard to figure out. So I always say, look, you can make an investigation check, put your rogue on it, put your bard, whoever's really good at that. And they can roll a check and I'll give you a hint, because I want people to feel smart. I want them to have the fun of solving the problem, not the frustration. And I do want character to play a role. Sometimes you'll play a rogue character who has a high intelligence, but puzzles aren't necessarily your personal strong suit. So you can use your character's abilities to help boost the success of solving a physical puzzle that someone has given you. So I would always offer not an out, but aid in that situation.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and it's hitting on something that's sort of at the core of the game, which is there's this weird element to D&D, which is how much of this is experiential versus how much of this is like narrative and storytelling. And there is this very funny thing where D&D is much better at providing you the power fantasy of being strong than it is of being smart or charismatic. Because if you think about it, because all action in D&D is narrated, if I'm playing some huge brawny Goliath, every time I'm asked to roll an athletics check, I have a huge margin of like success on those rolls. And most often I'm going to be narrated as doing a lot of damage and doing the athletics check and bashing the door down. And moment after moment after moment, I get to be like, woo, in this world, I'm strong, right?
Yep.
But the problem comes around with, like, yes, you can have a high deception or persuasion roll, but the issue is if I'm role playing out a scene and I like garble my words IRL,
right,
I am still gonna feel like, man, I'm not as charismatic as my guy. Like,
well, and I'll say this one thing. Again, another tip that I will recommend: whatever your players do IRL, include in the success. So even if they stutter or garble their words, I'm going to say that person finds your stutter so disarming and adorable that they let you walk past the gate. Like I want to, for exactly that reason, I want to include your real life moments. Sometimes people are like, and then I say like, I don't know, get out of here. So I'll say, and then you say, I don't know, like get out of here. Like I'll let the reality of what's going on live in the story so that they do feel like their success was based on their literal what they contributed. And I found a lot of success with that.
Oh, that is beautiful advice. So finding a way to spin that in, because again, that high roll can become a reaction to something. I love that. I think conversely too, what's interesting is it feels like that's an amazing way to handle the cognitive dissonance of someone being like, I want to live up to the expectations of my character, especially with those three stats like intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, which are much more embodied at the table than strength, dexterity, and constitution. But what I think is very interesting too is the reverse that happens sometimes, where someone is playing a character with like we have a wonderful player in our core cast for Dimension 20, Zach Oyama, who's played so many characters that might be described as himbo style characters. And he himself is brilliant and guesses my plots all the time. So there's this very funny moment where Zach will have to find a way for his character who is, and to his credit, I think the tip here is like he often just does a good job of role playing his character, getting to a realization that he had right away.
Right.
Just in that kind of like, so wait a minute.
Right.
Like,
so that was Jasmine on Relic. So Jasmine is a fiercely intelligent player. She, I'm sure, knew all of my puzzles immediately, but Beryl was much more of a wisdom, stat. She was much more about intuition and that kind of thing. So again, her literal investigative skills, she had to play down a bit, but she would come around and end up helping the team figure things out. But to that same point, so we have Tommy who plays Viros in Relics, and again, the character's fantastic because he's built this prince. He's a prince essentially, which we talked about and said, look, if you were a prince, you might be real handsome, but your entire life, everyone is going to laugh at all your jokes. They're going to tell you how great you are, but you haven't been tested, right? So you're probably not very funny, not very charming, but yet you think that you are. So we intentionally made his charisma stat kind of middling. It's not the worst because he's supposed to be kind of cute, but he's not actually very intuitive about people and social interactions. So what I love is Tommy leaned into that so hard. So he's always making charisma checks in situations, and they always fall flat on him. And it's great because the story then becomes this awakening of a young man who thought he was the SHIT, and turns out he's not really that interesting or, not that charming. So, again, that tension is so fabulous, and the fact that he is willing to play that. again, a great tip if you're making a character, have them disbelieve their own stats. Just because they've got low charisma doesn't mean they think they have low charisma.
That is so fun. That is so funny to me. I love that interpretation of the ability scores there. And I also love that idea of, again, characters like not being aware of their own flaws. I also, for the first time, I'm thinking in my head of like, maybe there should be some rule for bonded ability scores, because I'm trying to think like, is it even possible to have low wisdom and high charisma? Like, isn't a big part of charisma being able to like make people feel seen and heard? The idea of someone who's like,
well, no, but remember, intuition is a wisdom stat, right? So like insight is a wisdom stat versus persuasion, which just kind of means maybe people think you look good or you talk good, like it doesn't mean you actually know anything about them. But it's a fun distinction, I think.
I love that ruling in general of if you have high charisma and high wisdom, you're just an incredibly magnetic person who makes people feel very seen. If you have high charisma, low wisdom, the only explanation is you're hot. That's the only way.
Or right. I mean, that's kind of that. Or you just kind of know, like there are people who can, I almost want to say like con men or something like that. I don't know where you put them on like the wisdom versus intelligence score, but I also feel like wisdom has something to do with morality a little bit. Wisdom might play into your alignment in some regard. It would be very hard to play a high wisdom, evil alignment character in some sense. I'd be curious to see someone try to do it and what that would look like. But in some sense, to be a con man or woman, you would have to have that high charisma and high intelligence, but something in the wisdom department might have to be lacking. I don't know. It's just a question.
I love that. This is the kind of philosophical, crunchy D&D thing I love to get into. No, but I think that like, that's always a very, something that I love to point out about alignment, which I think 5e did the right thing in kind of downplaying the importance of alignment, which used to be very important.
Yeah.
And now
100% agree.
And now alignment is just sort of like your bonds, ideals, and flaws. It's like, hey, here's a way to kind of think about your character as like another descriptor. It's not as binding as it used to be. Mm-hmm. But what I do love the kind of message in terms of D&D world building, where you look at the idea of your three ability scores, like intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, don't actually relate to your alignment. And what does that suggest? To me, I think that's a great point about what does a high wisdom evil character look like. To me, that's the scariest villain of all, because that's
super curious to see how one would play that, right? I don't know.
When I think of a high wisdom villain, because the thing is, it's easy to imagine a high charisma villain, plenty of those in real life. Easy to imagine a high intelligence villain, the mastermind, right? The criminal mastermind. Right. The high wisdom villain, the thing that's scary about that is high wisdom means you accurately apprehend the world and the people in it. You have high insight and high perception. In other words, your understanding and awareness are high, and you choose cruelty.
Yeah.
You choose cruelty and choose suffering and choose harm. To me, that's almost and I think to me, a high wisdom villain is someone who has a philosophical attachment to evil.
I was going to say, what was I was doing a Pathfinder, Extinction Curse. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what they're, but they kind of have like evil druids, which is, some of it is like, the town is destroying our environment, and so we're gonna take out the town, and that there's a pathway towards an evil high wisdom character there. I also want to clarify that like playing a low wisdom character does not mean you're evil either. Sure. You can play the greatest, kindest, lowest wisdom character. So it isn't like an exact correlation, but there's something about high wisdom and choosing to be evil that is a very interesting combination that would be hard to pull off possibly.
I think, I think a high wisdom, any villain that you've ever watched that if you've watched it and gone, wait a minute, are they right? I think that's a high wisdom villain. You know, like you watch.
Villain.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen very many of those. It's a really tough combination.
It's a tough combination, but I think if
you sell, you know.
Yeah, like I think maybe if you go into, if I'm thinking of like superhero media, maybe like some iterations of Poison Ivy or or like you know what
environment,
environment, like a druid thing, but where she goes like, you're destroying the planet and your species doesn't matter more than other species. My response to that would have to be like, no,
right,
I don't like that. You know, like where the thing that's being done is it's a values system I don't agree with, but the person isn't incorrectly apprehending the world. They have just chosen values which are antithetical to whatever the hero in that story is standing.
Taking it to an extreme that then puts others in harm's way, something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. I love it. I wanted to talk too about the idea. This is all so fascinating of the different interplay. Oh, I wanted to also say too that like, I love what you're saying about like druids as these high wisdom villains. One of the things that I love and just sort of get on my little soapbox and shake my fist about is that I think characters in D&D worlds, obviously characters can't see their own, how do I put this? Their own character sheet, right? They don't know that they're fictional. But what's interesting is I think characters are probably partially aware of ability scores over time, because I think it's funny that if you look at D&D, which says in order to be an excellent druid or cleric, you need a high wisdom. Like if you are the head of some global druid order in a D&D world, I think you could probably over decades of doing it be like, you know what's weird? We see a correlation between our druids who are good at listening and reading people and how effective their spells are. Isn't that funny? Like over time, which
even like we know about ourselves, like, you know, I might know that like I'm no good on the phone, so I don't do phone calls, or, you know, whatever it is, or, you know, I'm flexible, but you know, don't ask me to tend your garden, you know, like, you know the things that you kind of are good at or not good at. So that's why I think, like, in talking about Tommy and Viros, we set up a very specific situation in which the yes men gave him the wrong impression about what he was good at. So I do think there's a sense of, when you're playing a character, being able to step up and say, hey, I've successfully picked locks before, why don't I give this one a try?
I love that so much. And I think going back to what you said, I think it's an excellent mechanic of like, use a character ability to get a hint, right? Because I think there's that excellent thing that DMs have to do, which is like, affirm the identity that the player wants for their character. Like, that's what we want. When I play the wizard, I want to at some point feel like I did something clever. And sometimes I'm not having a very clever day, and then the dice have to kind of come in and save me in that moment. When you are, so I want to ask a little bit, because obviously one thing you and I have in common is that we both DM under circumstances where we need like props made ahead of time. There's like stuff that comes out to the table that we have to like do. So when you're doing prep work for that, where do you go internally, like in your mind's eye, in terms of your priority list? Like, I think one thing that a lot of beginning GMs get intimidated by is this list of tasks that seems vastly open-ended, of like, should I stat out 100 monsters or 50? Or should I, how many dungeons should I draw? And how many NPCs should I make? When you're prepping for a session, where I think that like one of the best pieces of things we can do for DMs that are like listening is like, like, what's the rubric you use for all of our finite amount of time when it comes to prep work? Like, where does your mind go when it comes time to make the tools and toys you're going to have for your session?
Well, so I I think for live taped games, as well as for beginning dungeon masters, I will always recommend one shots. I think one, it's just easier to be like, here's your playground. There's a defined border to your playground. One, for me as the dungeon master, and two, for you as the players. You can, like I said, you can do whatever you want within the picture frame. Like, I'm not putting any limits on you within the picture frame, but you do have to sort of stay in the picture frame because there's only one exit, you know? So I think that's helpful. So for me, I almost always start with environment. So I think when I think about the concept of like a 5-room dungeon, that can be anything. That could be a house. That could be a dungeon. It could be a channel of streams. It could be a path through the woods. It could be a cliff face. It could be, you can reinvent and redefine what a 5-room dungeon is. All it is kind of, like I said, it's a picture frame on an adventure. So I always start with that and I go, what would be fun? Do I want to like experiment with water and like, how do you do combat in water? Do I want something hidden beneath still surfaces? Like usually I've got images of locations and environments and things that would like, that are spooky, that would like scare me. Because I like to lean into things that are like, ooh, that like did something to my belly, you know, like that's fun. So I tend to think about things like, what are things that are pretty commonly ubiquitously spooky for us as human beings, and how can I play on that? And is it claustrophobia, or is it drowning? Is it any of these things, you know? Shadows. And so I start with that, and usually I'll get a couple of images about either a battle environment or a puzzle environment, something like that, that I'll just start to flesh out and piece together. And then I might go and say, all right, I'm going to look up what types of monsters exist typically in this type of an environment. Now, I might already have some ideas. I might go, well, I'm going to do water, so I want sharks. Like, that's done. I want sharks. But then I'll go and do some research and find out, oh, well, I could also include mermaids or, you know, or merfolk. I could do that as well and throw some of that in. And then as I start to flesh out things that feel right, I'll go look at them and say, well, I like merfolk, but I really want this to be a higher level battle, so maybe not them. I'll use something that's a little tougher instead. And you kind of sort of piece together what you need through that. So that's sort of the next stage of it. Then from there, because I know what monsters there are and where I am, now I start to get a story. And I'll go, okay, why does this place exist? Who made it? Who found it? What might they have hidden here? I just start asking myself questions, and I go, well, if I want them to go in the deep pool, I better put something at the bottom of it. All right, there's a chest, and it glows, and you can see the sharks swimming in circles around it, and that's a test. So now they're standing on the bank of a deep pool watching sharks circle a chest that they know they want to get into. And that's all I have to do. Again, I need no solution to that problem. I just get to watch them go, okay, what are we going to do? And it just kind of builds from there. And then I'll come across, all right, I don't want them to get through this room to this room too fast, so I'll put a door here, and maybe that door should be hard to get open. I could put a puzzle on that door, and I'll do some research, or, you know, I have a lot of puzzles just stocked that I love that I can rearrange and work for different things. So then you throw a puzzle in, then you start making that prop. I probably wouldn't make a prop until I was pretty close to the end of the campaign, just because stuff changes. And a lot of times when I do a play test, I'll discover almost always cut. Almost always there's too much. It bogs it down. It takes more time to get to the important part or the exciting part of the story. So play tests almost always have me shortening things down. And I don't want to have spent, 3 days on a puzzle that then I'm just going to cut.
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. The idea of adding those touches in at the very end, I think, is very, very reasonable, especially because of one thing I want to advise young GMs to do too is take care of your time and resources and energy. Don't knock yourself out planning a ton of stuff that you're never going to get to. But I do love, again, there's so many things I want to shout out there. Number one, I remember when the group of players I was playing with got to a level where they were so brilliant as players and their characters were so powerful as characters that I started going I need to make this impossible for it to be remotely challenging. Like, and there's a little bit of humility that comes with that. Because at one point I would be like, I was like, how do they keep circumventing my clever traps? And then I was like, well, Brennan, it could be because you're not actually a dungeon master. You're some guy, and your friends are all incredibly brilliant, and there's 6 of them, like all pooling their resources together. So there's that moment where you go like, part of why creating a puzzle, it's not that the puzzle has no solution, but you're relying on the creativity of your players. Mm-hmm. We have, there are moments in campaigns where we have a player in our core cast, Emily Axford, who will sometimes suggest conspiracies, like maybe the bad guys are doing this, and routinely I will have to sit there
making a note. Yeah,
making a note. That's incredibly cool.
Really good idea. She's gonna pretend I did that and that she figured it out.
100%. So I love that. I love that to pieces. That's so great. And I love too your advice in terms of having logistics come after feeling. I think that's such an important piece of advice, because I think that a lot of people will start with world building and they'll start with the stuff that is bone dry, where they're like, cool, I want to make a world of myth and fantasy for my players. The 28 guilds of Regdar are based on a fiat currency. And I'm like, whoa. This is like, where as opposed to going, like you're talking about, of like, things hiding in still pools in the forest, and you go, that's a vibe. That's a vibe that I can clock, and that becomes to mix a bunch of metaphors in a row, that becomes the central note that you start to build your symphony around. It becomes the color that you begin your palette around.
So I recommend this writing tool that I learned through NaNoWriMo, which is coming up next month if there are any other participators. So it's called the Literary Scratch Test. And the idea is that you sit down and you write out lists of things that scare you, things that make you gag, things that break your heart, things that bring you immense joy. And the idea is that as you're writing them out, it should feel a little uncomfortable or a little crazy gleeful to write them out, right? And that whenever you're stuck in your story, find an appropriate one to fill in and start to give that moment some crackle, because you will always be able to be creative around something that makes you gag or something that terrifies you, you know? So if I'm stuck in a dungeon and I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen here. All right, terrifying clowns with blood dripping down their mouths, like, done, I'm in it. Everyone's scared of that.
Oh, that's such good advice.
If you have that kind of list to fall back on, you'll never really be stuck, because you'll always have something visceral that immediately engages you and immediately engages your players.
I think that's so real, and it gets down to the nitty gritty of what are we trying to experience at the table. Like, I would, again, not to be all hippy-dippy about it, but I would say the main thing we're chasing is a feeling, like the feeling of being on an adventure, the feeling of living in a story. And it actually goes back to old like improv advice I used to give students, where I would talk about how difficult it is to find humor in a scene from your prefrontal cortex, like from that extremely cerebral place. Because I would often say, like, there's 2 ways for us to like run an improv scene. We can do 3.5 minutes of writing jokes on our feet, which will make you want to pull your eyes out of your head. It will like, do you know how hard it is to write jokes? There are people that get paid to write jokes and they're brilliant and it's hard. Or we can find something funny in the scene that is about a vibe that juxtaposes with another vibe, an incongruity of feeling, some tonal dissonance. And in that same way, like if you are going into whether you're designing an encounter, a session, or a campaign, if you're approaching it from this completely cerebral place of like, okay, what do fantasy worlds have?
Yeah.
Swords, armies, wizards, and you're just like so acidic. Everything is like, purely verbal, abstract, intellectual, versus going to that place of like, what's a feeling I want my players to have? Yeah, like gothic sorrow, romantic, dark, deep castles. You click into that vibe, everything will flow from that place.
I always just new writers, new DMs write about something you find fascinating or interesting or scary or fun or sexy or whatever it is. Like go from your initial instinct and interest. So if I love like old horror movies, or not even that old, but the sort of 50-year-old horror movies, 40-year-old horror movies. So if it's The Exorcist, or if it's The Omen, or these movies, these things that are super fun, like how can I draw on, because I could write all day about that kind of creepy stuff, and I'm never going to lose ideas in that area. And you'll find, I've never had an issue where I was like, oh, this is too much like The Exorcist. There's never a plagiarism issue with it, because as soon as I pull out the few things that really excite me, my brain explodes with ideas, and it's suddenly something completely different. And then when I throw in a new monster, I go, oh my God, that takes it in another direction. So let things in the world that you love inspire you.
Oh, beautiful. We have been racing along in the podcast today. We got to jump into some questions from the Discord fans. Let's jump in here. This first question comes to us from Caitlin Doherty. Thank you, Caitlin. Without a group to play with right now, I've been throwing myself into world building. What do you... we love it. What do you love about creating a new world, and how do you keep track of the world you've created? Oh, two good questions here.
Very good questions.
What do you love about creating a new world, and how do you keep track of the world you've created? I'll jump in and say, some dungeon masters choose to have a 380-page Google Doc of indecipherable chicken scratch gibberish nonsense that they constantly have to do the command F search function to find old notes. I can't recommend that vociferously, but that's how some people do it. Keeping track of is a very logistical thing that I think we can get to in a moment. In terms of what I love about going to a new world, I think that there is something very cool and primal about when you go to a new world, because oftentimes there is something, I would say, bordering on the therapeutic about digging into your soul and going like, ooh, there's something in here that wants expression. And when you go into a world, there's often, I think, a very exciting release of creativity around like, oh, this is going to be a brand new place with new things to say and new feelings to explore and new meanings behind the relationships of its like people and settings and stuff like that. I think what I love about creating a new world is often that sense of there is a weird degree of like self-expression to it. Like, what does it mean when you go and say, I'm going to try to create the most shenanigans heavy, wacky, over the top, like what's that going to look like? Or like, ooh, I want to express something sad or somber or mournful in this space. I think that is always I definitely am the type of person who has an easier time expressing myself through metaphor, simile, and comparison. I'll mix metaphors all day. I'll be here. I'm very quick to go, you know what this is like? And then say some bizarre analogy that barely communicates the thing. But I think to that degree, I rely a lot on symbolism and mythic communication to sort through my own emotions just in day-to-day life. And so there's a lot about creating a world which, like, to summarize this, I love creating new worlds because it is inviting my best friends into a symbolic representation of thoughts or feelings that I feel like sharing or exploring with them, which sounds like psychodrama, but I don't mean it in that way of like, yo, come do my therapy for me. But I mean like that idea of like, if I create a world based on an ethical dilemma, I know that my friends are going to come into that dilemma and populate it and have new insights into it, which I could never have anticipated. If you create a world based on a feeling, a power feeling of love or sorrow or anger or fear, like I know that my brilliant collaborators are going to illuminate that. It's like inviting the excitement of a new world and allowing people to be invited into a symbolic conversation of new themes to explore. That's what I dig.
Wow. I mean, mine's much less selfless and grand. I mean, we've sort of already answered it, which is, you know, I get to make it up.
That's great.
Sort of held in by someone else's world, but also it's about possibility, right? So, you know, if I want to do a submarine, I can't really be in the Sword Coast, you know. So, in a way, creating my own world just means like, hey, possibilities, you know, and yes, I don't want it to be a free for all where, you know, there are no rules. There has to be some, to make it fair for the other players. There have to be some rules. But I generally, again, in the beginning, start pretty open with things that just I think would be fun and move from there into the more specific. So that's sort of, I think what excites me about New Worlds. In terms of how to track it, honestly, it's never really been a problem. Like I said, every once in a while, I might make a note if someone says something particularly brilliant or wants to add something. Like if someone's like, I wonder if there's someone who'd know about that in town. I'm like, oh, hell yeah, there's someone who knows about that in town. And I might write that down to remember that when they come back to town, I want to make sure there's someone they can look for. But for the most part, maybe because my focus is on ongoing story, it's never really an issue. I'm sure there are all kinds of continuity errors within my stories, but no one's ever like noticed them as a player, right. You know? And frankly, in terms of the larger story, the big bad or the big quest that they're going on, the major bones of that are already laid out. So that I know just in my head, in my heart. So without any notes, I know I'm not going to betray that. That nowhere along their adventure am I going to give them some information that's going to completely, destroy the kind of main thrust of this story because it's in my gut, you know.
Yeah, well, I think too, it's up to whoever you are listening to this in terms of designing your world.
Yeah,
it is your decision what kind of world you want to be in, and I would say that again, like, keeping track of stuff has a lot to do with genre and also tone, right? Like, and I would say too, like length of the amount of time you're going to be in that world. So like you think about someone like our mutual friend, Mr. Matthew Mercer, who has a world that's like going to exist for hundreds upon hundreds of hours of actual play.
Yes.
Go into a book and be held in the hands of thousands of people who are going to play in that world.
Yep.
Better believe that dude is keeping careful
track. Different world. Yes. Very different
world. But if you want to create a fantastical world that is rendered to use a metaphor, some worlds are rendered in photorealistic detail, and other worlds are rendered in beautiful watercolor with no harsh outlines. And within both those realities, no one would be like, well, clearly photos are better than paintings. It's like,
right.
That's not what's true.
What a fantastic metaphor you just made.
How about
the master of metaphors. That's a brilliant one. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that you can absolutely make the decision or just come to the realization that your setting can and should be a watercolor setting and go like this world should be, it was funny. I had a setting element in this one campaign I was doing where there were different planes of existence that were referred to as like the rings of reality, and one of them was like the ring of myth, right? And it was this mythic place where the gods dwelt and stuff like that, and the players went there and met this being, and I described them being there as I was like, you see things here in a different way. They are rendered as like platonic ideals of themselves, almost like you moved from a reality that had outlines to one that did not.
Wow,
things are just
cool.
things are just like color block, right?
Yeah.
And they met this character that was like literally, it was the wolf, right? And they were like, which wolf? And it's like, it's the wolf. It's the wolf. And it's like, in this reality, things don't get more specific than that. When you meet the wolf in the Ring of Myth, it's the wolf. It's the one that you know of, right? And like the idea of running an entire adventure in that setting feels like a very different kind of genre and tone. But if you want your world to take place in that kind of like when you're reading a fairy tale, at no point does a fairy tale ever go like, there was a little girl who lived in a hut at the edge of town. The town had a grain shortage. And the nearby economy, the fiefdoms surrounding it had like, like it just, that world doesn't exist in that logistical reality.
Or it's just not, it doesn't, to me, detail is about support. So does this detail actually add to and support your story and the experiences being had, or does it actually kind of take away from it? And again, neither is right. I 100%, I mean, Matt Mercer, the responsibility in his hand with that show, his is a very detailed world, and those details support every single story choice and every business choice that is going to happen with this story because of the hours of material and the publishing of it later. So it is 100% supportive of his purpose. But for most of us at home who are not necessarily going to publish or present this over a long time, maybe that kind of detail, if it isn't need to know information, it might actually just be a distraction from the mood or the story or the genre, whatever it is you're trying to get across. You don't want to muddy those waters too much unless it's necessary.
This is like the crown. This is like a diamond. This is a gem, Deborah. It's so.
Well, it came from you.
No, it came from you.
Gem.
No, that idea of what you just said of like, it's about service. It's about the idea of, does this serve what you're trying to do? Because I think that there's a lot of people who get overwhelmed their first time at bat of like, gotta build a world. Yeah. What do worlds have? Characters, towns. I gotta make towns. Yeah. And that's all groovy. But I think what you just said, it summarized so beautifully, is just that idea of, is it helping you? Does it serve your purpose? Yeah. Which brings us back to the idea of like tone. And here's what I'll say, right? It's like I talk a lot of shit on like logistics. I make fun of economy a lot. I make fun of like because I think anytime the economy shows up in a fantasy world, I always go like, like you look at like Harry Potter and you're like, how are the Weasleys poor? They're magic. How did this happen? Or you look at, and also,
or my favorite one, which is like, why does he have glasses? Can we fix his eyes?
Can we not fix this poor kid's eyes?
Why does
I don't get it. But here, and the other funny thing too, though, is, and I'll look at other things too. And in the stories I tell, in a lot of the settings that I've run, I don't have like magic item shops because I prefer for my magic items to feel kind of legendary. Like I don't want King Arthur to go buy Excalibur at the dollar store.
Well, conversely, so right directly to that point, that's what I love about relics, is that you can't buy magic items. You can buy magic trinkets. Yeah. You can buy a piece of thread that might do something for you. I don't know. But the only things you can buy are very low magic. And the only way they become powerful is the way you choose to use them. So you can't, I don't want to just give you a +2 sword because that just changes the math. And like, what's fun about that? I want to give you unbreakable string and see what you do with it.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. And that's the thing, is that choice on your part is not only is it like a fun mechanical thing. I think number one, that goes to the thing of giving players toys that they can be creative with is always going to be better than giving them a number. And number two, what I love is, like you just said, Unbreakable String communicates the fairy tale sparkle magic of an adventure so much more than I'm depositing a +2 Flamebringer double poison, whatever, it's so good.
I mean, my players used it to saw a shark in half, so like that is more than any +2 sword.
I love it. I feel like your players and my players would get along very well. In my home game, players had an immovable rod, which is one of my favorites. I love an immovable rod. And they used it to completely destroy us. They were in an airplane being chased by a sky ship with an open maw to crush them. And one of the players just leaned and clicked the immovable rod, and the ship hit it. And I said, we're gonna make a roll to see if it punches through the back of the ship, and it didn't. So I was like, the ship stops on a dime, and everyone on deck goes flying over the.
I just finished Storm King's Thunder, and they used the immovable rod to trap Imrith. One person, so she attempted their little rogue attempted to put the rod in Imrith's mouth and stop it. She lost her hand in the process of doing it, but was able to click it before it happened. And they effectively, she couldn't fly, she couldn't move around, it was so brilliant. And the great thing is it was at the end of the fight, so we had all the fun of sneaking through the caverns and stuff like that. Oh my god, spoilers alert. I'm sorry.
I love
it. Great, again, a simple little common magic item fell the dragon.
Oh god, that's so important. That's so fun. To offer the other side of the coin, and to go back to our point, any of the things that I bring up or make fun of, like economy, like logistics, boys, sweet dogs, lots of puppies, like economy and the logistics of economy and things like that. What I want to point out, and to your point of, does it serve the narrative? The exception to that is I don't know if you've read Patrick Rothfuss's In the Name of the Wind or Kingkiller Chronicle books.
No, I haven't.
Oh, incredible.
He's great, yeah.
He's amazing. And what I love is it's exactly what I'm talking about and have kind of been roasting of a deep economy system, getting into the different types of coins and where they're from. I love it. I love it because the story is about a broke wizard. He's broke. He's always thinking about money.
Yeah.
Because he's broke. He's got to get cash. And I also love in that, at least in the first book of the Kingkiller Chronicles, the moral of the story is here's the most talented Lou Lymphata, Taliesin, wonder wizard of all time who can barely get it together because he's poor. It's the generational poverty is so powerful that even him being the wonder child is no, I'm hanging on by a thread, gang. But to your point, that's an example, and I think that's what it is in Patrick Rothfuss's world, an in-depth economy exactly serves the story he's trying to tell. So figuring out as you're building your world, what elements of world building are going to serve the exact story you want to tell. And I think that's...
oh my God, that was one question. All right.
Okay, one down.
We are long-winded. We like to talk. It's good.
It's true. This next one comes from Paul Thomas Cruiser. Thanks, Paul. Deborah, how does it feel to move back and forth between being a Hollywood actress and active TTRPG player / DM? While a background in acting must be helpful in embodying the characters, is it at all frustrating / difficult to move between acting gigs where there's a script, a director, individual takes multiple times until it's just right, and TTRPG stuff where there's no script, no second chances, and the story has to keep barreling forward? Or are there benefits to living in these two very different worlds?
Yeah, well, part two, right? I mean, yeah, the latter. Yeah, I mean, one, you can enjoy both more because you've experienced the other. I think that, I mean, as an actor, the really fun, exciting part of it is this trying to see the world through someone else's eyes, through different circumstances and experiences, and then let yourself, when you really believe those circumstances and experiences, just let yourself see the world differently. And it's it's active, but it's also sort of passive. It's a little like letting it's letting the story play you a little bit more than you playing the story in some sense. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you don't make active choices, but those choices are they're sort of influenced by this kind of like, I'm just like, in being John Malkovich, I'm just like in this person's head, looking out of her eyes and just kind of going with the flow kind of thing. So there's a real fun and fascination in that. But in the whole, when you're an actor, you're really just a brick in the wall. It's somebody else designed the wall, somebody else is building it, and I show up for the day and make my little brick, and I try to make my brick as strong and as interesting as I can. But then they're going to slot it in, and I kind of go home and have nothing more to do with the wall. So there's what RPG does for me is I still get to have that kind of like John Malkovich experience where I can kind of live in it and just play in the space and let the world and the actions of the players or my fellow teammates play on me. But I also get to help design the wall, both as a player and as a DM. I'm designing the wall, I'm building the wall, and at the end of the day, I go home having a real sense of authority, of authorship over this space, this world, this story. So that satisfies a need that I have that the acting doesn't necessarily give me. And it's funny because I don't really have any desire to be like a director or a writer in the entertainment space because it doesn't really interest me. I don't think I'd be very good at it. But that doesn't mean I don't want that kind of sense of authorship and ownership. And I can have that over my role. But it's really fun to come home and be like, wow, this whole world, I have some sense of kind of this came out of my weird brain.
First of all, a beautiful metaphor. But I totally empathize with that. And like being multidisciplinary, there are very few things that scratch as many creative itches at the same time as playing D&D. Like it is a deeply fulfilling place to be in, to be able to experience that many emotions, and especially running games, to simultaneously be engaging your mind at the top of its ability as a listener, as a creative individual, as a director. Like, I think that's one thing that's interesting about being a DM is, yes, you are listening and ingesting information, and yes, you are being characters and unveiling new plot points and being dramatic. You're performing. Yes, you're also a writer because you've planned this stuff ahead of time. But in a weird way, you're also often a director or a producer in terms of managing things like pacing and time, kind of knowing when to narrate. I feel like one of the unsung skills of a DM is knowing when to be like, okay, so this conversation ends and you move on to the next thing. Like
right.
Which is
a young boy runs in and goes, hark, I have a letter.
It's very funny. I feel like there are moments where I will literally be like, if I let these guys talk, they would talk for 4 hours. Like no one.
Part of me wants to be like, look, if that's what they want to do, we will do that. But very rarely is that actually what they want to do.
But it's very true. Well, That's a whole can of worms we could get into, is to, like, you're playing with other adults. They are in control of their destiny and fortune. But there is a little bit of being a dungeon master, which has that kind of attitude of like, I think I know what you want more than you know what you want. At times. But that specific way that manifests, which I think is so funny, is this is a very little tactical little nugget of advice for people watching, but there's a weird thing that happens where PCs will get into these conversation loops where they're feeling a sense of urgency about what they need to do, and they're talking about what they need to do, but none of them feels deputized to actually go, I stand up and walk out the door to go do the thing, beckoning for everyone to follow me.
Yep.
That can be a very hard thing. So as a DM, I think you can interject with little like, okay, it sounds like you guys want to do this. Do you do this? And then
right.
like narrating.
That's helpful, and that's totally helpful. But I also do like sometimes I'm really sitting there going, how can I if I want them to have the battle in the street and I need them to leave I go, how can I bring the street battle into the bar then? Like if they're just going to talk to the bartender and get all the information so they can make the perfect plan before they go outside, I might go, you see two big burly fighters and they fall in through the saloon doors and now they're on the ground. One looks up and recognizes you. Like now you got to act, right? So sometimes I'm trying to find like in-story active ways to be like, you're not the world is not going to let you postpone this any longer. Roll initiative.
Roll initiative, baby. I love that's the great DM phrase. It's like, look, we're transitioning. Roll initiative. Yeah, change the game on them. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I think that's being that sort of master of the nature of play that we're in, kind of setting that tempo. That was just something I wanted when we were talking before in that question that we already spent 20 minutes answering. But that there is an element. I want to talk to you about your philosophy, because you said that really great thing. I think when I think of you as a dungeon master, I think of you on the spectrum, very much in the realm of that spectrum of like, we have come here to exist in the fantastical, like sky's the limit, like, anything can happen. But I love what you said too about like occasionally we do have to enforce a rule or enforce a boundary somewhere. And I wanted to ask to you as someone that very much wants to afford that realm of the fantastical to your players, do you have an internal barometer that guides when you feel it is necessary to step in and enforce a boundary, whether it be rule-based or even whether it be like narrative, like what is the limit of what a persuasion roll is capable of achieving?
Right.
What's the, you know what I'm saying? Like,
sure. Well, I think definitely remembering that, like, at least in most circumstances, physics exists. Remembering that like skill checks aren't magic. There is magic that you can use that work like skill checks, but the skill checks themselves are not magical checks. So, rolling a 20 to jump over a 40-foot wall is never going to succeed. But I might make it like the coolest jump anyone has ever seen, but you still don't get over the fence,
Yeah,
in the same way that like sometimes with a 1, the failure doesn't necessarily have to be defeat or embarrassment. It can be goofy or silly, Yeah. So we have space within these things to kind of tailor them to story, to genre, to mood, to tone, all those things we talked about, and still enforce the rules and the boundaries without sort of taking away player agency. So, one of my favorite things, and DMs say it all the time, and I'm especially guilty of it, is you can try. Like I want to try and persuade or the bad guy, and I go, you could try.
Well, it's really funny too, because I think that what people often don't get about enforcing those boundaries is a lot of when I make a determination to like be harsh or not has to do, a lot of times it's like when you see me coming down on a player with a consequence or a boundary, I'm actually usually defending some other part of the setting. Like, for example, your thing of like I'm not going to let you persuade the bad guy. I won't let you persuade the bad guy either. And I can tell you exactly why I won't.
Right.
It's not because I don't want you to be able to do cool shit. It's because you have 5 other adventurers here. They've been waiting for this big boss fight for 2.5 hours. I'm not going to letting you persuade the bad, like, and people would be like, why can't you let him do something cool? And it's like, because everyone should get a turn to do something cool. Like, I can't let you one hit the boss. Like,
well, my thing is, also we know if the boss is persuadable or not, what that is. And so we know even with a 20, it's probably not going to happen because, again, it's not magic. But again, I'm still of the mind to say, try it. Because then maybe they roll a 20, and maybe they give the most persuasive, rousing speech, and we describe it in all of its glory. So they get the glory of that moment, and then the villain goes, or whatever it is, and it doesn't work. But there's still fun in the attempt. And I think, maybe the villain is just impressed by you and your persuasive powers, but it doesn't actually change what they're going to do or that the fight is going to happen. So I think I can enforce rules and boundaries without just like chopping someone off at the knees,
Yeah, I think that's a really delicate balance for newer GMs of figuring out. And I think too that there are elements where you can acknowledge that your players, and I don't say this to infantilize players. Players are brilliant. They're adults. They know. And when I'm DMing, my players almost always know way more than I do. Are incredible geniuses that I'm struggling to keep up with. But what I would say is players are immersed in the world. When a big bad guy shows up, they get rattled. They're attached to a character. Like they're much more immersed than you are as a DM, which means that oftentimes they're going to make decisions that are very in character. And what do characters do? Often pursue pleasure and avoid pain over the short term. That's like what characters do. So you have this weird thing where let's say that we're playing something in that we know we're in an incredibly grim, dark, fantasy setting where it's like, oh, we need to defend the castle against these marauders, and it's all sputtering torchlight, and that's the vibe we're going for. If someone goes like, can I pull a bazooka out of my butt? Right. And you have to go, and but that's the thing is I'm not in my head thinking like, oh, what a dumb joke. I'm resentful of my player for having a moment of levity at the table. I'm just thinking, ha ha ha, funny. No. Because not because it's a bad joke, but because if I gave it to you, it'd actually make you sad. You're asking for it, but you don't really want it. Yeah. And enforcing that, kind of being the bumpers on the bowling lane there of here's what's inside the harmony that we're trying to hit. You know how bowling balls create harmony? Again, these metaphors. Good grief.
I think to that same point, allowing players' personality and player choices to be part of the game. So again, it's not just a numbers game and a character game. So again, if my player wants to persuade the evil villain to just give it all up, and I say, sure, go about it, and they roll a 20, that's not, if they try to persuade them by saying, think of the children, and I know that they don't care about the children, even a 20 isn't going to do it. But if they say, you're so beautiful, someone like you shouldn't be ruling this silly little town, you should go to that kingdom, and I know that my character's totally going to go for that might be a more effective D20 roll than the D20 roll that says think of the children. So because it's a skill check and not a magic check, the roll can also be literally affected by the story of who that other person is.
Fully agreed. I've had moments where a player character said something and I didn't make them roll for persuasion because I, as the DM, was like, I can't think of a response to that. I don't even know how my NPC would disagree with what you just said. It was so convincing. So that's a beautiful thing too. And I think that what you're saying, if you want to honor those roles, there's a ton of Aikido, kind of redirecting of energy that a DM can do. Let's say that you're listening to us talking, you're like, but I always want to reward creative play. There are ways to reward it. We had spoilers for Unsleeping City, one of our seasons, but we had a final boss fight where there was a boss that gave a temptation, froze time to give a temptation to every single player to leave the fight. Have your character leave, and I'll grant you your dearest wish, right?
Cool.
And every one of those scenes was run one-on-one. The other players all left, so there was no communal pressure to do the right thing. It was you can give up and no one will know.
Right.
And every player, without any context, all did the heroic thing. We're like, "Fuck you! I'll never give up. I love my friends. I'm a hero." One player, Siobhan Thompson, did this move where she looked at everyone else had their big dynamic moment or their sorrowful moment, the moment where they said, she looked at this boss, and her character was kind of like an amoral character in some ways, or like not amoral, but like mercurial and very fey. And it was the first time her character fully dropped her guard and looked at this villainous spirit and said, and basically the thing was, her character was, long story, her character was a fairy that had come to New York. This was in a magical New York City. Come to New York and become a rejuvenating
star.
To be a star, exactly. So she was a fairy that came to the mortal world to be a star. Yes. And the creature they were fighting was this like sort of toxic, corrupted spirit of the American dream. Okay. And so the American dream was like, I can give you everything, riches, endless. And she looked at it and went, my love, for you are my love, my one true love. You are already real. And it was the sickest like mic drop thing. And I think she may have rolled some incredible roll. Maybe I didn't even ask her to roll. I forget now. But what I did in that moment was I was never going to go like, oh, you just defeat the main bad guy. I halved the bad guy's hit points. I just went.
Yeah, that's great.
I just went like, that's such a sick mic drop that a lot of the spiritual energy leaves this being.
Yeah, but you can use conditions to do things like that. Like, I might impose some sort of disadvantage specifically on attacks towards that person for the next 3 rounds or something like there are, without giving them exactly what they want that's going to sort of halt the game right in its tracks. Exactly. There are even mechanical ways that you can reward the creative behavior without letting it derail you.
I love that. And I think that's a great example of like, again, you are rewarding the players. And I think it's one of these things where it sounds like we're describing an adversarial relationship where the players are trying to like get away with something, but it's not adversarial. Players are deeply in character, and it often makes sense that players would try to do the best they can, and maybe sometimes even ask for things that they actually wouldn't necessarily enjoy. It's like a dog chasing a car. Like, I wouldn't know what to do if I caught it. Like, I never thought I would actually catch it. Like, players do sometimes make those requests that push the envelope. And I think as a DM, it's totally within your purview and actually kind of mandatory for you to go, I'm not going to give you exactly what you asked for because I feel that in the long run, it will actually disappoint you to get what you're asking for. But I am going to reward your cool choice with XYZ thing that is maybe creative, but doesn't completely blow up the encounter or the session or the campaign. Holy moly, that was we only made it through 3 questions. We made it through 2 questions.
2 questions. Oh my goodness.
We made it through 2 questions. I think, you know what? I think we have time for. Let me see if we have time for one more. This is a mini one here.
Okay.
This one comes to us from Chair. Thanks, Chair. What is your favorite party dynamic and why? This is a fun little question. What's your favorite party dynamic and why? This is a fun one. I think when you're I know that you've said before that you're DMing, people can make their own characters or come in. Some people you'll walk through hand in hand. From the GM seat, from that Dungeon Master's seat, what do you look for as the party dynamic that for you feels like it helps your work as the DM the most, and also enriches the story the most?
Right. I want my players to be bonded. I want their characters to be bonded. I want them to care about each other. I want them to make sacrifices for one another. I think my favorite character player dynamic that I've witnessed as a DM and that I've been a part of myself, and this might be a very feminine piece of it, but I love strong sisterhood. When female characters or female players bond and have, like the 2 characters who sawed that shark in half were, are two strong female characters who made this amazing choice together and ended up making shark tooth necklaces that they both wear now. And I think there's something, like my heart goes, oh, wow, So there is something really, wonderful and healing and exciting, I think, for women to witness other women being so supportive and sweet and helpful to each other. And it's really wonderful to be a part of that as well. So while I want that general feeling amongst all of my players, I want all of my players to feel bonded and like a family. That one in particular, I think, because of our experiences, that one really speaks to me.
I love that. I think, yeah, the party dynamics that I sort of fall in love with the most are the tropes of found family, of like people finding love and connection and heroism and family through the most adverse of circumstances. And I think the kind of the thing within the whole system of like fighter, cleric, rogue, wizard that's kind of like buried in there in the subtext is this idea of like our gifts are unique, our backgrounds maybe don't align, but through these acts of heroism we come to the same place. There's something about that idea of we didn't all come from the same place, but we all got to the same place.
Well, and I love it because it's about we need each other. One of us alone couldn't do this quest or solve this thing. And that was one thing that I really liked from 4E that I pulled through, is that not only were there the classes, but they defined them into like controller, healer, so that you kind of, not only did you have your class, but you also served a specific purpose in the team. And they sort of said the best teams have one or two people that either fit one of those definitions great or can kind of work in two of them. So I like that idea of like making sure that your team is diverse and in skill and in ability, and that you can't get through the battle without everyone's abilities on display and at your need, at your use.
Yeah, that's it. It is that the best. There's like best superhero teams. It's like what makes the X-Men so cool. It's that thing of like unique abilities, unique gifts, unique perspectives. And it's one of these things where like to me, inner party conflict is maybe not the right word. I want the party to bond and work together, but there's something about the idea of like the story of people who don't always see eye to eye finding common ground and camaraderie. Like that's what the moment, one of the moments I love is that thing of like that moment where the very lawful good paladin and the very chaotic good rogue who maybe have been at odds have that one adventure where they save each other's ass and finally it's like I get you, buddy. Like that's I kind of live for that moment of like the motley crew, the misfits, the kind of the Breakfast Club mentality of like you wouldn't have imagined that we would have become family, but here we are.
Right. I mean, I'm never. I don't mind if those things kind of happen on their own. I generally dislike inter-party conflict.
Sure.
Just as me personally. I don't, maybe because I've had too many experiences where bad players gave them the opportunity to be kind of mean.
Yes.
To just and mean to me too. It's like if a player's having trouble breaking into a chest or something like that, they go, well, this is stupid and I hate this adventure. And I go, well, come on, I spent a lot of time and like, let's play a thing. So sometimes when there's too much party conflict like implanted in the idea of the story, I've just seen some people take advantage of that. So I generally try to leave it pretty clean of that. Now, definitely, if there's a character that loves money and they're in the middle of a room full of money and they've got to choose between the money and their friends, like that's a fun character conflict. But ideologically, I kind of want my characters on the same page. That's just a personal issue because I am uncomfortable with confrontation. So I don't want player confrontation at my table.
That makes perfect sense to me.
But I think more free to explore in that space. That isn't like a judgment of how you like to play. It's just me personally in my games, I don't like to go too deep into that side of it.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that there's a element of like needing people you trust to be at the table before you like really get involved in that. But I also think that in this like, to me, the best conflicts are not consciously working across purpose. I think that almost never, like having PCs that are actively working against each other just grinds everything to a halt and ends up in hurt feelings. To me, it's about the idea, like when I think of conflict, I'm not thinking of characters that actively are malicious towards each other or players for that matter. It's that idea of like, what does this like, timid academy trained wizard apprentice with a hat too big for their head and this like grimy dockside mercenary, like what common ground in their worldview do these two characters really have? And it's like the joy to me of like a flavorful party dynamic is that first time that it's just those two characters at the campfire taking watch, and the guy's like, so tell me, Tordek, what sort of board games or different sort of puzzle manuals do you like? Sorry, puzzle manual? Like that's the conflict that I love, of like the Motley Crue conflict, the thing of like unlikely friends and allies.
Sure. I mean, that might be an aspect of my game that is undeveloped for me. I think I don't have a lot of sitting around the campfire talking moments in my games. Again, I'm like action, progress, forward. I want to tell this story, like there's not puzzles. I don't do downtime, or anything like that. I'm like, sure, you spend a week, you buy some stuff, moving on.
You make a campfire, a puzzle comes out of the fire,
or you make a campfire and either something happens in the night and we have that encounter, or nothing happens and we move on the next day. Like I don't spend a lot of downtime just sort of doing that. And I will admit that there are lots of players that really do want to play in that space, and I am either not the right DM for you, or as I said, that's an aspect of my game that I have yet to develop. Like I said, I started 10 years ago. So I'm still finding what that is. But for me, I don't like playing those moments as a player. I don't want to like have a conversation in character around a campfire. I want to get to the action and the storytelling and play in the game. So I don't tend to leave a lot of space for that in my games. But I would be curious over the next 5 to 10 years as I grow and develop as a DM, if I would find room for that. It's just I'm allowing space for myself to grow.
Shooting all the way back to a conversation we had at the beginning, that feels to me like a wonderful definition of that thing before where we said, like you said, like money, character, and plot. And to me, I think of those different hooks, because to me, I think that there is definitely, I feel like you are a player, like as a player, I love plot-based players, and I think that's a very real thing, because there are some players, people might lump character and plot into just being like story, but I really do think that there are people for whom the game is an ability to sink deeply into character, and then there are other players who are like, nah, I am chasing this story down. You're like, what are your deep character conflicts? None, baby. Next puzzle. Like,
kind of. Like I remember, so like for example, Critical Role, they really, because they're voice actors, I think they really do love that downtime conversation, that kind of stuff that they do, and I am unversed in that, I guess. So when I was on the show, we did it. I had a great time. We did the battle. We searched the thing. We did fun, and at the end, there was like this extra 45 minutes to an hour of talk, and I remember sitting there and being like, oh, I don't know how Twiggy fits into this. So Twiggy was basically like, bye, this is fun, here's a ball. And I just left. Because I was like, I don't know, I'm not a member of this team, a regular member. So I don't, know everyone's name or character's name, or what they're about. So Twiggy's just kind of like, I'm going to make friends. Hi, everybody. Great. We did the adventure. I'm going to go meet some new friends. So I did kind of chicken out or bail out a little bit on that last moment. And I'm not beating myself up about that, because I do think that just for me, the joy that I get out of D&D is that action plot oriented joy. it's just not as much fun for me to sit around and talk in funny voices. But again, that's not an indictment on anyone who does really love that part of it.
There are people for whom D&D is primarily a strategy combat game.
Right, exactly.
And that's completely legit as well.
Yeah.
If anything, it's awesome to talk to a DM who has a vision of the game that services a type of, like, there is someone listening to this right now who has probably listened to multiple episodes of this podcast where I'm like, exploring themes, and they're like, ooh, and to hear you come on and be like, actually, like, this is about the thrill of adventure, about getting to the next room in the dungeon, this is about solving the mystery and achieving the quest, who's probably feeling elated to have that play style, truly. So I think that fucking rocks. And
I think the great thing so far about the D&D community with most people that I've met is that we all are such champions of each other, and that, you know, myself not being kind of more the role-playing part of RPG is less interesting to me. I can still, Critical Role will still have me and gleefully and let me play exactly how I like to play, and it still fuses so nicely. You know, and similarly on a lot of other things I've done where I've played with people who have very different sort of interests within this small world, we somehow find a way to just kind of make it work. So in a way, that was how I felt at the end of Critical Role. I was like, this isn't like this. I had my moment. This moment isn't about me. So I'm going to kind of bow out and let them really have this moment because they're good at it and it brings them joy. And I shouldn't be in there going, what happens next? You know, I should step aside.
It just cuts to you looking at Matt being like, wrap it up, dude. Hey, wrap it up.
We're just like, what? Why are we talking? Where are we going?
See, I love that. I love that too, because I think also that's a great piece of advice in general, which is that D&D is an ensemble game, and not every moment's going to be for everybody. Like, you have to bow out from time to time. A scene is going to focus on somebody else. Like, for me, like, in terms of what I'm trying to think of what within D&D is like an area that I don't tend to go to as a character that much. I don't know. I think that I tend to I guess probably like wealth acquisition is not a huge part of like, I'm not a big treasure head. Like, in my longest running home game, I don't really award treasure. I'm just like, oh, if you're running low on magic items, we'll tell a cool story where you get a new one. But just the idea of acquisitiveness doesn't really get the job done for me. Yeah. But it's no shade on anyone that enjoys that. And I think that if I was playing at a table where people were like, all right, let's get our money out, we're going to buy stuff, we're going to get stuff, I would probably just have my character. Like, I've made a bunch of characters that for one reason or another didn't have belongings. I just made a character that doesn't have belongings because he's just a straight up wolf and he's naked and doesn't have any stuff. So in that moment, I'm
similar there. I tend to, like, with my players, I'm always like, look, you're basically going to get 10 GP every couple of days. Like, you can maintain your stuff without any worries. Now, if you're going to go on like a hike through the desert for a month, I might make you prepare for that. But for the most part, if you're in society, you can stop at the pharmacy and you know, get some more rations. Like, I'm not,
stop at Fantasy Rite Aid, get what you need, and then scoot along. No, I truly agree. Yeah. And I think in that moment where but like, as you're saying, if I'm playing that wolf character with no belongings and it's a big shopping spree session, hell yeah, more power to you. And I would totally do what you did and just be like, I'm going to take a back seat because this clearly rules. It's just not for me, right? Yeah. And I think that is probably a level of like emotional maturity that will enhance a lot of tables to be like,
I mean, that's exactly why, going back to where we started with, I'm like, for every adventure, I try to include the emotional, the money, and the plot hook. So you've been tracking down the henchman of the big bad. You find out that he's kidnapped a family and they're staying in a cave that is known to contain treasures. And you're like, great, we're all covered. It will advance the plot. We can save a family and we'll get some money. You know, like, we're going to the cave.
Hell yeah. I love it. Yeah. Just get a little something for everybody.
Yeah.
This has been such a delightful conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, we've gone way over time. I've been having too much fun. Deborah Ann Woll, it has been such a pleasure and an honor to have you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. This was so great.
Thank you to everyone watching at home. It's been an absolute blast. We'll see you next time on Adventuring Academy. Woo!